You?
It's already started.
Oh.
So I will give it to you after. That direction.
Okay. Okay.それじゃあ始めましょうね。はい。そしてこういう形で今日特別シリーズということで、Today's guest speaker is Dr. Florin Feshnik from Babeș-Bolyai University in Romania. 拍手。Thank you very much. Mulțumim.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's my second time in Japan and at this university. It was a real pleasure. Last time was like a small conference, and it was a great interaction with your colleagues back then. So I'm from Romania, close to Ukraine, and I won't talk much about Romania. I'll talk more, pretty much just about Ukraine today. Okay. Bit of roadmap, so to say. I'll start with my Ukrainian background because I'm 30% Ukrainian. I have some Ukrainian, so that's why I'm not 100% objective in what I will be telling you today. So I'll just say a few words about my Ukrainian roots, and then the second part of my talk today will be about the Ukrainian presidential elections in the 1990s, where I think there's a result that's really interesting, counterintuitive, and it's not just that, it does relate to what happened later on, what's going on right now. So I'll end up with some impressions about what's going on right now in Ukraine. I'm not an expert in international relations, military things or whatnot. It's just it's a layman's perspective, just someone who's interested in what's going on over there. Okay. So to make it more specific, I'm 50% Romanian, 25% Moldovan. Moldovan as in there's a region in Romania called Moldova, and there's a Republic of Moldova, neighboring Romania. It's kind of sandwiched in between Romania, Ukraine, and Russia. And that's a map of Europe. Romania's over here, Moldova's over here, Ukraine, and then this big thing over there is Russia. Close up. So this is my home city, Cluj, in the center of Transylvania, Romania. So that's Moldova, where my mother is from. There's a city called Bălți, over there. And then my grandfather was originally not from Kiev, from a village close to Kiev in Ukraine. And the thing that's happening right now happens pretty much in this area of Ukraine. So here's Crimea and eastern Ukraine. That's where most of the action, if I can call it this way, is happening right now. Okay, so this is a map that I did using data from the 2001 census in Ukraine. I think that's the last census that was conducted because of various other issues. There wasn't any additional census, not recent census. So here's dark brown color, so to say, is where there's few Russian speaking. There's a distinction, an important distinction in Ukraine between ethnic Russians, which is only, they were only 22% or something like that of the total population. Now, because Crimea was occupied by Russia, it's probably less than that, probably 20% or even less. And then here we have other regions where we have, oh, sorry, I started to go one way and diverge. So about a quarter of the population, 1/5, 1/4 of the population in Ukraine is, or at least was, before the invasion of Crimea, were ethnic Russians. But then we have about another 25% of the population who are not ethnic Russians, but their first language is Russian. So even though they're ethnic Ukrainians, they speak back home, or friends, family, mostly Russian rather than Ukrainian. So in terms of language, it's an almost even split. Okay, this matters for the war, for the things that happened in the last few years, but it also happened, so this is a map again, and as you can see, it pretty much overlaps, so that's map, it's the war going on right now, and you notice that it overlaps very closely with the previous map. This was the previous map, yes. These regions plus Crimea. And Zaporizhia is where the nuclear plant is. Maybe you've heard something on the news. Even here, it's pretty scary. It really is. Okay. So that's kind of, this would be the conclusion of the next part. Why I think this is, in addition to being a cool result, I will get back to this. Okay, so we're talking now about presidential elections in Ukraine in the 1990s. So, usually, whether we're talking about Ukraine, Romania, United States, Western Europe, or Japan, when you see a party or a candidate winning lots of votes in a certain region, then you expect them to do well in the next. My geography fails me. It's the northernmost part of Japan. Is that where the opposition does well and Liberal Democrats do poorly? I think it could be. But anyway, so if you see that in the last election, you would expect to see that in the following election. So I don't have data for Japan, so it's United States. So an example of what I'm talking about is here. Not because I like Trump, I really dislike the guy, but he ran in 2 consecutive elections. So we have the same candidate in 2016 and 2020. So these are the 50 American states, yes. And on the horizontal, x-axis is percent votes for Trump in 2016. On the vertical is percent vote for Trump in 2020. And as we would expect, pretty much anywhere, if he did poorly in California, Hawaii, Vermont in 2016, he did equally poorly in 2020. And conversely, in Wyoming, West Virginia, and so on. He did well, really well, in both elections. And this correlation, I don't know if they did do any stats or something, but it's quite intuitive. It's almost perfect. Yeah. His 2016 vote is an almost perfect predictor of his vote 4 years later. Okay, what this has to do with Ukraine, you might wonder. Well, there's that saying in journalism, it's not news when a dog bites a man, it's news when it's the other way around. Yeah. When a man bites a dog. So that's kind of what happened in Ukraine in the 1990s. So here we have the same candidate for presidency, Leonid Kuchma. And we have a pretty strong correlation, but it's a negative correlation. So in places where he did really well in 1994, he did really poorly in 1999, and conversely, where he did really poorly in 1994, he did really well in 1990. So this is a puzzle. Same candidate, but the results are almost a mirror image of one another, but the opposite. So what on earth is going on? If you're thinking about the results in terms of classical left and right, they start to make even less sense. So Kuchma was kind of center-right on left-right, say, socioeconomic terms. In 1994, his opponent was Kravchuk. Kravchuk was the incumbent president. He lost to Kuchma in 1994. Pyotr Simonenko, his opponent in 1999, was the leader of the Communist Party of Ukraine. So you can imagine in terms of left-right where he was. So it's almost the same situation in 1999 compared to 1994. So the mystery only deepens if we only look at it this way. However, think what we just saw earlier, the map, think what's on the news. If we think of Ukrainian politics as two-dimensional, left, right, but also a second dimension, which pits Russophiles against Ukrainian nationalists. The positions of Kravchuk, the opponent of Kuchma in 1994, and Simonenko in 1999 were polar opposites. Yes. So Simonenko was the leader of the Communist Party, wanted to come to make Russian the official language of Ukraine, whereas Kravchuk was a Ukrainian nationalist. And Kuchma was kind of in between, yes? So if the choice is in 1994 is between Kravchuk and Kuchma, Kravchuk will be the preferred candidate of Ukrainian nationalists, and Kuchma will be the preferred candidate of Russian-speaking Russophiles. Whereas in 1999, it's the opposite, yes? Ukrainian nationalists would be, yeah, well, we don't really like Kuchma, but he's still way better than Simonenko. So that's why the results at regional level reverse, because also at the individual level, yeah. Regions that have lots of Ukrainian nationalists voted for Kravchuk in 1994, but for Kuchma in 1999. And conversely, when we have Russophiles, they voted for Kuchma in 1999, but for Simonenko in 1990. And this is just another illustration of this. Yanukovych was Kuchma's successor. Yeah. So we're back to where we were in the early 1990s. Now we have yet again in early 2000, including 2012, a Ukrainian nationalist Yanukovych was the Russophile. So, the Crimean Republic, Sevastopol is the city in the center of Crimea, but it's considered kind of a region of itself, Donetsk and Luhansk, where the war is going on right now. Yeah, and where we have a lot of Russian-speaking population voting for Yanukovych, and the rest of the country, as the percentage of Russian-speaking population went down, so did the vote for Yanukovych. Okay, Leo, quick question. Should I discuss this table or should I skip it? Because I don't know if statistics.
Yeah.
are lots of fun.
Please skip that.
Huh?
Please skip.
Skip?
Yes.
Okay, I'll skip it. If any of you is interested, you're more than welcome to, get the PowerPoint with it or write me an email and I'll tell you the statistical mumbo jumbo. Okay, so what if I could travel in time, and I'd be a very famous and smart scholar, which I'm really not, imagining that by looking at those results, what would you think the lesson would be? Well, at least that's my interpretation. So, we've actually seen this. We're seeing right now the consequences of this. And we've seen it reflected in election results earlier. Yes. Cultural ethnic divisions beat everything. Almost everything else fails in comparison. Now, if that's the case, you may think of designing institutions accordingly. Yeah? Maybe having a presidential system, for instance. It's a good idea. Yeah? Presidential systems are winner take all. Now, in a context like Ukraine, it's either a Russophile or a Ukrainian nationalist. Same with whether you have a unitary system or a federal system. Maybe if the government was willing to give a bit more autonomy to Crimea, to eastern regions, would that change history? Maybe not. But even if it didn't change history, it would have given less of an excuse to Putin and his regime to do. There's no excuse for that, but he can pretend, oh, look what Ukrainian nationalists, the Ukrainian central government did. And same with the electoral system, yeah? Initially, well, technically now it's proportional, but initially it wasn't, so only after some changes. But anyways, in a context like this, proportional representation is also a good idea to have. And that's proportional representation coupled with a parliamentary system can lead to a scenario where you have Russophiles on one end, ethnic Ukrainian nationalists at other, and you might have just a few moderates in between, 5 or 10%. But those 5 or 10%, if they gain representation, and we have a parliamentary system, those might be the kingmakers. Yeah. To force either group at the other extremes to be more moderate. Okay. Here's the final part, and it's mostly some reflections, some impressions coming from me. So again, I'm no expert in wars, in international relations, in military issues. I'm mostly about voting behavior, electoral system, stuff like that. So this is really not my thing. But I'm interested in, as a neighbor of Ukraine, obviously I'm worried about what's going on, and as a human being, as a citizen of this world, if you will. So this is, this is my impression. That's really, it's the public opinion. It's also some governments which may be lukewarm or neutral or whatever, as you are well familiar. There's a couple of countries from Scandinavia who weren't NATO members and now they want to join NATO. So if one of the goals of Putin was to flex his muscles and divide, actually he unified the West even more. Okay, this one is kind of, right, obviously, but still, I think it is important. Well, in the context of Ukraine, and it would be elsewhere. So, if we travel back in time and think, well, maybe when the Red Army was fighting Germans in the Second World War, they would be like, yes, we'll fight them because they attacked us. It's kind of what Putin is claiming right now, but I don't think anyone believes it. Seriously. That's a joke. So I think the determination of Ukrainians and Ukrainian armed forces is way bigger than the motivation of Russians, most Russian soldiers, even officers, generals. Why on earth are we in Ukraine? Okay, my thing with North Korea is kind of, I think, and I hope this is true, and it's not just wishful thinking, okay. Both Kim in North Korea and Putin in Russia are slightly insane leaders, I would say. It's just that on the one hand, North Korea's military capabilities are less than Russia's. It's still really scary and worrisome. In Russia, though, I think there's more, I should say, what should we call them, veto players, to say. I mean, it's not like Putin just presses the red button and throws, there's a few others, decision makers. And they'll be like, okay, if Putin is insane and wants to blow up the world, why would I help him? Those actors, Russian generals will think, well, okay, if that happens, then the West or other countries will retaliate. So it's kind of, next is online is us, me, my family, my kids. So why would I help? Whereas in how the process would work in North Korea, I'm even scared to imagine. So, anyways, and more generally, I really do think, and we have even in recent days, well, recent weeks, recent days, there was an important military mutiny. I mean, the private army of Putin started marching toward Moscow, and they stopped. But that's a clear indication that, he doesn't have full support, even from the elite. And going back once more to comparison with North Korea, Russian elites, they're not very enlightened, liberal, what have you, but they do like to travel to the West, to shopping in Paris and Rome and Tokyo, maybe, I don't know, not that aware of that. They like to send their kids to Western universities, good universities, and all these things are way more difficult now and even impossible. So like, okay, what do I have to gain from this war? Not much for lots of the Russian elites. Actually, they have more to lose rather than to win. So it's not normative calculation. It's a very pragmatic calculation. And okay, these last 3 points are kind of related, but still they are separate, so related. Okay. Speaking of corruption, and you'll see an illustration. It's about corruption. It's also about the infrastructure. When I think infrastructure and sanctions apparently did have an important effect, and they do have an important effect on the Russian military, because lots of the technology they're using comes from the West. And now with the sanctions, it's difficult to replace. Now, illustration of this, if you read the news, the reports, can see, watch videos on YouTube, seeing Russian trucks, Russian armed vehicles, Russian tanks, stopping on their way to their destination because they run out of fuel. So that's partly, obviously, a result of corruption, but also poor organization, strategic planning, you name it. The best militaries in the world right now, they need logistics as much as they need weapons and soldiers of good quality like that. Yeah. So if you run out of fuel, you can have the best tanks in the world. They will stop, and that's it. There's plenty of examples of that. There's the stories about okay, in addition to fuel, say Russian trucks braking, as in literally braking on their way where they were going. And apparently, in terms of taking care of your vehicles, believe it or not, it's important, to use them every once in a while. Russians will leave a truck in the very same spot for 5 or 10 or 15 years, and when it starts, the tires will break, because if you don't move it, think of the tires. Yeah. If you don't move it, the sun will hit it for like 5, 10, 15 years in the same place. You simply have to move it around, so that couldn't happen. And perhaps the most spectacular failure, and I have a few examples over here. Oh yeah, and in terms of being overrated, well, I've already touched upon this. Ukraine prepared, so Crimea was invaded in 2014 with no fighting, but it was overnight, and that was it. Ukrainians prepared for almost a decade for what's going on right now, with Western help, lots of Western help. So 2014 is nothing like what's going on right now. So it was a shock for both Putin and for the Western observers, actually. Okay, and yeah, the most spectacular example of all this are the Russian tanks. So Russian tanks have a design of a okay. That is the quote. Imagine a tank in the Second World War. How do you hit a tank? I mean, you hit it directly, yeah? Like this, horizontally. There were no smart bombs, there were no drones, there was no such thing in the Second World War. There are now. The Russian tanks are designed exactly like the Soviet tanks 70, 80 years ago, whatever. So this upper part is called the turret. Western modern tanks have their ammunition down here. Russian tanks have it up here. So if that hits, the whole tank blows. And here's a bunch of pictures with Russian tanks. It's like, yeah, it's like a disaster waiting to happen. So it's not just a handful of, these are a handful of pictures, but they lost hundreds and hundreds of tanks this way. And Russian tanks were used in the first Iraq war in 1990. Was it 1990 or 1980? No, it was 1991. In 1990 it was the invasion and the war was. And more recently, the second Iraq war in 2003. So the Russian leadership, the Russian designers should have seen this coming. They've seen this 20 years ago, they've seen this 30 years ago, and they did nothing about it. The design of the Russian tanks is the same as it was 20 years ago, as it was 30 years ago, as it was during the Second World War. So, so this is really bad news for the Russian army. It's really good news for me and people like myself. I think should be good news for you because we should like dictators to lose wars and bad guys to lose wars. And this in and by itself is really important, but I think it also illustrates a more broader phenomenon. I was talking about leadership, corruption, poor organization, and so on and so forth. So, like I said, I'm optimistic. I do hope my optimism is also realistic. So, on this note, here, and thank you for your attention. Glory to Ukraine. Slava Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. 質問とかありますか Do you have any questions? はい、じゃあちょっと考えてシンキングタイム。Okay, then, may I ask you a question about Romanian politics? Sure, Romanian politics. Okay. So, is Euroscepticism growing in Romania or not? Now, what do you think about it?
My kind of gut feeling is that it is. It's just that we do not have very good current data, so yes, no. But yeah, I'm afraid so. With other nice, as in, I'm joking. Yeah. Nice, right? Yeah, nasty, really. Kind of like climate change skepticism, kind of anti-vax.
Yeah, COVID.
Yeah. So it's related. It's not one thing. It's a bunch of things going on, and we see this in Western Europe. We see the in the US happening. Unfortunately. Yeah.
Say AUR or some parties, Euroscepticism.
Sorry.
AURE.
Yeah. There's we're talking about there's this new party in Romanian politics which is pretty scary. It's extremely right-wing, very authoritarian, very nationalist, anti-vaxxer, anti-European, everything.
なんかこう最近 EU に対する態度はルーマニアどうですかみたいな質問をして、なんか結構まあ反 EU 的な感情も結構最近高まってきてみたいな、陰謀論とか反ワクチンとかみたいな話をちょっと聞いて、そう。Regarding Euroscepticism, how does it compare to other East European countries? How does it compare?
In terms of substance or in terms of magnitude, what percentage of? To the best of my the data that I do remember a few years back was that Romanians were among most Europhiles, not Eurosceptics.
Yes.
So they were, well that's, it's kind of what you would expect because Romania really has benefited a lot from European integration. You know, the Romanian Eurosceptics would disagree, but I think they're horribly wrong. So we have freedom of movement, we have there's a funny episode, so my sister lives in the US, so she's an American citizen. And we were traveling from my home city, from Cluj, from Romania to Vienna. And I had this new kind of passport, which I think you have in Japan as well. It's with a chip, so you can actually scan it. So I didn't have to go through security, automatic checks. There were these gates, I went there, I scanned my passport, and I went through. And my sister had an American passport, so she had to queue for like half an hour, and I was waiting for her. And I said, see, how lucky I am. I'm a Romanian citizen, and how unlucky you are. You're an American citizen. Yeah, anyway, I thought it was pretty funny.
Any questions? No? まあなんかこう反 EU 感情も高まってるんだけど経済的メリットもあるからまあいっかぐらいに思ってるらしいです。タイがねメリットが大きいということで。Okay. Today's lecture is closed. So thank you very much. Bam with me, Florian. Yeah, bam with me. ということで、じゃあ今日は以上で終わりということで、来週の課題はまたあれ出しますので、外書の人はそれをチェックしてやるというか、また大学院の皆さんもどうもありがとうございました。また来週通常通り木曜日やりますので、はい、そんな感じで。じゃあもう一回、バンバン。Thank you for all. バンブルツミー。